Hey, what's going on everyone? Vasco here and welcome back to the channel. And in this video, let's answer the most important question after last week's Bahrain Grand Prix, and that is whether the 2022 cars actually improved racing. Let's do this. Okay, so this year Formula 1 introduced some major changes to their regulation that now sees the reintroduction of ground effect. So as you know, cars today produce most of their downforce through the floor of the car instead of through the massive front and rear wings, such as we did in 2017 to 2021. And even though the cars are a bit slower than those cars, the aim is to improve wheel-to-wheel racing and to allow the cars to follow each other closely. So today we are going to take a look at last week's Bahrain Grand Prix through the lens of someone who is trying to understand whether these cars actually improved racing. And for that we are going to take a look at three key moments of the race, which include the first lap, the epic battle between Charles Leclerc and Max Verstappen, and for some reason we are also going to talk about Valtteri Bottas. Let's do this. Okay, so during the first lap of the race, we are going to be taking a look at the trajectories that every single car is making in order to find out if cars are fighting in unusual places of the track. Now, this may seem a weird way to evaluate if these regulations are working, but what cars fighting in places of the track where they usually don't is that they are less affected by the wake of the car in front, so they have freedom to explore more unusual areas of the track. And in this picture from racefans.net you can see this brilliantly. So this was a thing that jumped out to me during the first lap of the race, was seeing cars fight all over the track, and it looked like drivers were able to explore every inch of the track and put themselves in some very unusual places without being afraid of suffering from the wake of the car in front. And this was in the first lap, so this is when drivers are not thinking about regulations, they are not thinking about where to place their car, they are just acting on pure instinct, and what their instinct told them is that they were able to race at every single part of the track without being affected by the wake of the car in front in a way that would make them lose time. So for me, this first lap was an early sign that the regulations were actually going to work, and it was honestly one of the most chaotic opening laps on a non-wet track that I've ever seen. Okay, and after the start of the race, what we wanted to watch was a proper on-track battle in order to test how these cars were working. And we got just that when Charles Leclerc came out of the pits on lap 17, and he came really close to Max Verstappen, who had just performed a major undercut on him. So after Charles came out of the pits, Max went immediately on the aggressive since he was very close to him on track, and what followed was one of the most amazing 3 laps of racing that I've ever seen in Formula 1. So Charles and Max were able to fight for 3 laps in a row, and in the 2 first overtaking zones of the Bahrain Grand Prix, they were able to switch positions lap after lap after lap. Now this tells us 2 things about the regulations. Well, firstly, a lot of people were asking why were they only overtaking on DRS if the regulations are supposed to help them follow through the corners. Well, let's take a look back actually at the 2021 Bahrain Grand Prix. Well, remember that race, a race that we all called a crazy season opener with an epic fight between Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton? Well, that epic fight was Max chasing Lewis on newer tires and making one overtake attempt. So now in 2022, what we actually got was actually a fight for the lead that lasted for 4 to 5 laps and honestly only stopped because Max's Red Bull was having issues. So this tells me that both the aerodynamic regulations and the brand new tires allow for much closer racing than before. So let's take a look at the aerodynamics first. Even though the cars were actually only trying to overtake themselves on the DRS zones, and they were being very strategic with the DRS zones, especially Charles Leclerc when it came to re-overtaking Max Verstappen, but they were able to stay very close through the rest of the lap. So in 2021 and before, what would happen is that you had much better tires and you would kind of kill your tires in order to get to the back of the car in front, and then you would have one shot to overtake. And if you missed that one shot, just like Max Verstappen did back in 2021, well, then you were done. You were going to be P2 for the race, you were not going to be allowed to overtake. But in 2022 what we saw was that the drivers, even if they didn't make an overtake, they were able to follow the car in front through Sector 2 of the Bahrain Grand Prix, which is full of a lot of high speed and downforce dependent corners, in order to be just on the back of the car in front when it came to the DRS zones. So Leclerc didn't get a massive advantage due to the clear air, and Max Verstappen was able to keep up with him through the corners, even though the Red Bull was running on a lower downforce setup. So for me this was an epic battle that really showed us what the 2022 regulations are capable of delivering, and after watching this I honestly have no doubts that Formula 1 is going in the right direction. Okay, so I'm going to explain myself now. So Valtteri Bottas had an amazing qualifying session, qualifying in P6 in an Alfa Romeo. Now this speaks volumes about the quality of driver that Bottas still is, and about the major step that Alfa Romeo and Ferrari did on the power unit side, but he had a very good qualifying session. But that's not the point. Well, Valtteri Bottas, after starting P6 on a faster car, had a crazy first lap that saw him drop from P6 to P14, so one of the worst first laps that I've seen in a long time from Valtteri Bottas, who is usually a very consistent driver around the race starts. And everyone who was watching the transmission and that has been watching Formula 1 for the last couple of years may remember Bottas as a driver that, even in a dominant Mercedes, once he got stuck around those midfield cars, he could not get past them, and that was in part due to his driving and in part due to the regulations. So I was very interested to see the impact that Valtteri Bottas in his faster Alfa Romeo could have against the slower Mercedes-powered cars, and it was a lot. So if you remember, in 2021 and previously, once a faster car got stuck around those midfield cars, there was no way that they were going to get back in the front unless you had a crazy advantage with things like the engine, such as Hamilton had in Brazil, but that was not the case for Valtteri. So he was stuck behind a lot of slower cars, and he was able to fight his way back to P6. Now this was an amazing result for him and for Alfa Romeo to have a double points finish in the first race of the season, but it spoke volumes about what the new regulations can do. So with the faster car, Valtteri was now no longer stuck around those slower cars, and through the race he was able to make his way up the grid and up the grid and up the grid up until he reached the point where the car couldn't deliver anymore. And this is something that we really want to see, because we don't want to see drivers in fast cars. So imagine if Charles Leclerc or Max Verstappen got stuck behind the midfield, we want to see them being able to fight back to the front. So in this scenario, we want to see the tires being able to hold on, but we also want to see the drivers being able to make those moves. And that's exactly what Valtteri did. And if you take a look at Bottas' race, I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to find the images, but he had a lot of overtakes, especially on Yuki Tsunoda. He had an overtake at the corner where overtakes normally aren't possible. So he overtook Tsunoda into turn 8, and his teammate Guan Yu Zhou followed suit closely. So it was very good to see a faster driver in a faster car not being held up by slower cars in front and being able to make those moves. Now you may be wondering if this is not going to kill those crazy race results, and it kind of is. It kind of is going to kill those races where a faster car gets stuck in the midfield and someone unexpected ends up winning. But it's going to have the major advantage that the championship contenders are not going to be held up and are going to be able to fight for race wins even if they have a bad start, or even if something unlucky for them happens during the race. And the fact that these faster cars that are usually built more to the limits of the regulations and that normally are more sensitive to aerodynamic quake are now able to overtake slower cars and get back where they belong is a real big proof that the regulations are actually working, and that the kind of aerodynamic quake that we have seen from this generation of cars is much less, or at least is much better distributed than in previous generations. And as a result, at least on purpose-built tracks such as Bahrain, I think we are going to see major improvements in racing this year, and I'm very excited for what this generation of cars is going to bring, especially as the rule makers adjust the rules in order to make the cars even closer, and as the field spread diminishes as the slower cars get up to speed. I think we are going to see some amazing and crazy races in 2022, and honestly I cannot wait to see these cars in the wet and on street circuits such as Jeddah next week, because I think that in those situations these cars will shine and we are going to have much better racing. And I'm also very curious for tracks that are normally lacking in overtaking such as Barcelona, what we are going to see there. So you can let me know in the comments on below, how do you think that these cars are going to perform at Jeddah, and if you thought that they improved racing at Bahrain. So with that said, that's been it for this video, and please don't forget to like and subscribe, it helps out the channel a lot, and also turn on notifications to know every single time I go live. Last time it was a lot of fun to talk to you guys in a more relaxed, long form and interactive way, so stay tuned for that. So you can check out my latest video right here, or the recording of that live stream right here, and I'll see you after the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. Goodbye!